Thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm excited to be here with a very long-time friend, colleague, person, Gretchen, who I counted. We've known each other for 34 years, which is like makes both of us really old. So yay for that. So I have like a lot of stuff that I would love to share with you in the next hour, and hopefully we'll get it through it all. I'm usually pretty good about timing. So let's talk about predominantly the victimization and the violence that's happening against trans folks, and then some of the things that we can do about it. So the agenda that I have for this first hour is to really have a quick 101 of like who Forge is, and then a quick trans 101. I'd like to share some quick snapshots also of the national victimization rates that trans people experience. I'd like to spend a bunch of time talking about this triple pandemic, and you'll understand where we're going when we get there. And then we have some Wisconsin-specific data that might be useful to folks to really bring that home to your community, our community here. And then we'll close this part of it with what you can do, and we'll make that a fun, interactive period. So let me give you a little thumbnail about who Forge is. We have been around for 27 years, so quite a long time. We are a national trans anti-violence organization that mostly focuses on the intersections of trans folks and sexual assault, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, dating violence, and hate-motivated crimes. So most of our work is national. We have some work that we do here in Wisconsin, probably about 10 or 15%. Of the national work that we do, about 75% of that work is training victim service providers, mental health providers, allied professionals, and then about 25% of the work that we do nationally is directly with trans communities. So that's roughly our split in the work that we do. We have been federally funded since 2009, which I think is kind of a fun thing to have. We were the first trans organization to receive federal funding through the Department of Justice. So I'm not sure that's worth hanging your hat on, but it's kind of an interesting factoid. We have a really small staff. So we've got 4 full-time people and 2 part-time people. And we all look very white, like a lot of us in Wisconsin do. We're working on that part of it, but we have a really good team that we try to do a lot of impactful work. Just a teeny little bit about who I am, just to give you a little bit of sense of who you're spending time with this evening. I am Forge's executive director, which means that I do everything from grant reporting to making coffee and everything in between. I am our primary trainer and really kind of involved with the oversight of all of our programming. And I'm many, many, many other things, but that is the thumbnail. If you'd like to find us, I'm going to get the business out of the way first. If you'd like to find us online, we have 3 websites, all kind of geared towards different things. The national website is the top one. The middle website, forge-wi.org, is mostly Wisconsin-based stuff, as the name suggests. And then the last one is transsurvivors.com, which is a blog for and about trans survivors of violence. If you want to find us on social media, you can find us here. This is where we obviously are sharing a lot of information, especially in this COVID world. And I want to remind folks to take care of yourself. I know that this is a hot topic. It can be a hot, exciting topic. It can be a hot, painful topic. It can be lots of things. So please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. I'm going to encourage you all to interact with me and with others today. And if you feel comfortable doing that, that's super. And if not, that is okay too. So the 2 ways that I would love for you to interact with each other today, and maybe we can't do this. Patty, we can't do this, can we? We can't do interaction through chat. Scratch that. No interactions through chat. We will find a different way to do that. And then the second way is if you can multitask, and if you're young enough or skilled enough, I'm going to have a section at the end where I'm going to encourage you to open up a web browser, and we'll go to a link and we'll do a community mind map together. So if that works for this group, it will work. And if not, we will play it by ear. So many of you might know that last week, Wednesday, so a week ago, was the Transgender Day of Visibility. So March 31st every year is the Trans Day of Visibility. And so many of you might have seen that Governor Evers and Tom Barrett here in Milwaukee and many people across the state leaders and political folks put out proclamations or statements, which is kind of cool. So I'm wondering, nobody can unmute themselves, right? So we're going to have to probably skip this, but I'm curious about what people did, if anything, for Trans Day of Visibility. And so I'm just going to imagine what you're saying. And it could have been like, I didn't know that was a day, so I didn't do anything. But if you didn't do anything, I'd really encourage you to mark this day on your calendar for next year and think about what you would like to do next year for Trans Day of Visibility. Might be putting out a flag in your yard, might be calling or talking to a trans friend or neighbor, anything that you can do that raises up the visibility of trans folks and trans issues. So let's talk about some brief Trans 101 reminders before we talk about more hearty subjects. This is a quote that I absolutely love from Lynn Fraser, who is a practicing therapist in San Francisco. She was the past president of WPATH, which is basically this organization that kind of does a lot of standards of care around transgender health. And she said that no one's identity is a disorder. And a lot of times we think about trans folks and we think about this pathologizing nature of what the media does to trans folks. So just the reminders we talk about this, that everybody has identity and identities, and those identities are not disorders. I will share in the chat when we get done, when I get done talking, because I can't multitask, this great handout, which is called the Gender Unicorn. And it's for folks that are not familiar with trans issues. This is a great, really simplistic graphic of kind of explaining the differences between gender identity, gender expression, sexual or romantic orientation, and sex assigned at birth. I'm going to do a really quick version of that right now. So gender identity is what's on the inside. We all have a gender identity. Most of us identify as male or female, man or woman. All of us have a gender expression. So what kind of clothes do we put on this morning? How do we style our hair? Do we wear makeup? Do we wear jewelry? What kinds of things express our gender to the world? Most all of us have some kind of attraction to someone else, not all of us, but who our heart is attached to, who our sexuality is geared towards, which is totally separate from those gender identity and gender expression pieces. And then we have things like sex assigned at birth. So our sex assigned at birth for a lot of trans folks is different than what our gender identity or gender expression is. That was the thumbnail for the unicorn handout. So if we had the chat open, which we don't, I would ask you what percentage of the population is transgender. And so I'm seeing all of your numbers come in the imaginary chat. And you're going to say that it's someplace between 0.6% and 1% of the population. So we don't really know what percentage of the population is trans. We don't ask on the census. If we asked on the census, some people that are trans would say male or female. They wouldn't want to answer trans. So it's someplace between 0.5% and probably greater than 1%. Right now, we've got lots and lots of young people that are identifying as non-binary, as genderqueer, as gender fluid. And so the percentage of young people that identify in that category is much larger than 1%. So the number doesn't really matter, right? There are trans people in the world. It's someplace around 1% or higher. Let me just share, if we take that 1% or higher and we break down kind of who is comprised of that 1%, a lot of times people think about trans folks as people that move from one gender to another gender. And as you can see on the screen, about 1/3 of the folks in the trans community identify as trans men or trans masculine folks. About 1/3 identify as trans women or trans feminine folks. So there's people that move from one box to another box, another binary box. But the largest piece of that pie, and this has been replicated in many different kinds of surveys, is this piece that is non-binary, or people that are not fitting into that male or female category. So as we talk today, I just would encourage you to think about who else is in the world that doesn't fit into that neat category, which is not so neat, of male or female. So if we take 1% of the population, if we look at the state of Wisconsin, it means that roughly 58,000 people in Wisconsin are trans. Could be more than that, but it's probably not less than that. So there are millions and millions of ways to be trans, an unlimited number of ways to be trans. So if you have in your head that there's one way to be trans, again, I'd like to encourage you to think about all of the different ways that people can express themselves, that people can identify. think about other kinds of identities and realize, how many different ways there are to be whatever that identity is. It's true for trans folks as well. So excuse the expletive here, but I love this quote from John Oliver, who said, some transgender people do undergo hormone therapy or sexual reassignment surgery as part of their transition. Some do not. And interestingly, their decision on this matter is, medically speaking, none of your effing business. So just a reminder again that, folks may take many different paths to feel comfortable in their skin and in their mind and in their body. When we look at some of the options that trans folks generally kind of take action on, a lot of folks will take or make medical choices. So they may take hormones, they may have surgery, they may, engage in body modification in some way to align their outside with their inside. And a lot of trans folks don't do anything medically. Same for legally. There's a bunch of folks who want to change their name, want to change their gender, want to change their identity documents. There are also a lot of people that don't want to. And we can talk about this a little bit later, but in terms of legality and changing name and changing gender, for folks that identify as non-binary, it's oftentimes kind of like, do I want to have this one binary gender and change it to another binary gender? Or do I want to just kind of live with what I have on my documentation, knowing that nothing is going to really capture who I am? And then the third category that we kind of look at is kind of around social, like who am I out to? How do I walk through the world? Do I live predominantly in a specific gender or in another gender or some part of the time, some another part of the time? What is my social interaction with the world and who knows what about me? So those are the three kind of mix and match options in a really simplistic way about where trans folks may kind of land. So I think we all know that language matters, and I think we all know that language changes over time. Merriam-Webster continues to add new words to the big magic dictionary that probably is not printed anymore. And we all care about language that is used about us. So when we look at trans experiences, there are lots and lots and lots of words that trans people may find an allegiance with or an alliance with. So I know what's on the screen is not readable and it's not really intended to be, but these are just 100 different identities that might be related to someone's trans experience. So that's just 100. And there, again, are millions of words that people might feel comfortable with to identify themselves. So again, language is always evolving. We've changed language in the course of time that I've been out, which has been around 30 years now. And language can be really complicated and it can be really simple. So it's complicated because it's changing. And it's simple because if we're talking with somebody, we can mirror their language. We can use the language that they're using. And that's the really simple part of it. We don't have to worry about always learning new things when we can just listen. And if we need to ask somebody, hey, well, what does that mean? I've never heard that before. We can gently ask, somebody what that word means. I'll give you an example. A lot of folks are starting to learn the word cisgender. So it's kind of the opposite of transgender. And it's a word that's come more into use in the last, maybe decade or so. Same with the language of non-binary or agender, or using different pronouns than we grew up with. If those of us are like over 25 or over 30, we may have only known about he or she. And now there's a whole realm of pronouns that people are oftentimes using. So the folks, again, that are probably of an older generation probably know this cartoon character, the Abominable Snowman, and Bugs Bunny. And this character used to non-consensually squeeze Bugs Bunny and say, I will hug him and pet him and squeeze him and call him George. So we all know that not every Bugs Bunny is called George. We know that not every person is called George. And it's kind of rude for somebody to say, well, I'm going to hug you and pet you and squeeze you, and I'm going to call you George. We want to ask people what their name is. So one of the things that I would love for folks to get out of today is just the reminder that we don't know somebody's name and we don't know somebody's pronoun unless if we ask them. So again, like on the slide right now is, we respect each other's pronouns because we respect each other. Can you do the same? So it's just a simple matter of, can we ask people what their pronouns are? Can we ask people what their name is? And then can we consistently use what they tell us? And by doing things like asking people's names and pronouns, it can literally save people's lives. So this slide really shows that when we respect, especially young people's names and pronouns, it dramatically reduces the amount of depression they feel, the amount of suicidal thoughts that they have, and it reduces the amount of suicide attempts that they might make. So it's really, really critical that we mirror their language and we ask. So there'll be a couple of photos as we go through, and because I typically train professionals, and a lot of times professionals say, well, I've never seen a trans person. I always want to make sure that when I present, there's images of healthy, vibrant trans people, so that there can just be this reflection of trans people look like everybody else. And so here's some examples. Let's talk a little bit about some national data. So what I'm going to share with you is the bad stuff, the things that are not great that trans people experience. And we'll talk at the end about what we can do to try to remedy some of those challenges that a lot of trans people experience. So I do want folks to know that a lot of trans people, almost all trans people, are resilient and wonderful and beautiful. And this is the hard stuff that happens to a lot of trans folks. So let's start by looking at what happens in kindergarten through grade 12. We know that a lot of students are expelled some reason because that they were trans or they were expressing themselves or their gender in a way that the school did not approve of, did not like, and they chose to kick that student out. There was an even greater number, so 17% of folks that left school due to violence. So something was happening in school, they were being bullied, they were being physically assaulted by either teachers or other students, and they left. And we can all imagine what is going to happen to those students who leave school. Is this about the school to prison pipeline? Is this what happens when kids get kicked out of school and then kicked out of their home? What happens if they can't get a job because they don't have a high school diploma? All of those things can kind of compound from somebody getting kicked out of school or leaving school due to violence. We can look at things like being denied access to public restrooms. And this slide is from the National Center for Transgender Equality, and I believe it's probably lower than what is being experienced by a lot of folks. So in 2011, they said it was around 22% of folks that are trans were denied access to a restroom, so they couldn't use the restroom that aligned with their gender. There is a lot of sexual assault and intimate partner violence that happens against trans folks. So someplace between 50% for intimate partner violence or domestic violence, and upwards of 66% or more for sexual violence or sexual assault. So a lot of negative experiences with those intimate forms of violence. If we take this and kind of hone in on one particular way or area that people may experience sexual violence, we've been very stunned at the statistic that 10% of trans folks have been sexually assaulted by a healthcare provider, which is really profound. So 1 in 10 trans people who have experienced sexual assault by their healthcare provider. A quarter of them have experienced physical assault from their provider. So if we look at the health and wellness of trans people, for those folks who experience some kind of abuse or assault, they're not likely going to want to go back to that healthcare provider or maybe even any healthcare provider for fear that that's going to happen again. So just to kind of frame this a little bit, this is from a survey that we did, and we asked people just to check off the boxes of what they had experienced. So we asked about hate-motivated crimes and stalking and intimate partner violence, dating violence, adult sexual assault, and childhood sexual abuse. And when we were analyzing the data, we were surprised at how many people had checked more than one box. So this slide represents the people that checked more than one box of those particular categories. So for example, the people that experienced adult sexual assault, 72% of them also experienced stalking. So this is really profound for service providers, because if you're working with somebody and they come in and they say, well, I've experienced this form of violence, it's highly, highly likely that they've experienced another form of violence. 2 more national data slides. This one is on drugs and alcohol. So if we look at the folks that in the general US population who use, or probably we would call it abuse, drugs and alcohol, it's around 7%. When we look at the trans community, it's almost 26%. And this doesn't mean that trans people are more likely to use drugs and alcohol because they're trans, but there's societal discrimination, there's abuse, there's a lot of things that are happening in trans people's lives that they may turn to drugs and alcohol as a way to cope with those issues around stigma, those issues around minority stress. A lot of those, that heavy weight might be addressed in the only way that trans folks know how, which might be through drugs or alcohol. And the last data slide for national is on suicide attempts. And again, this is a slide that should make all of us kind of stop in our tracks. So when we look at the general US population, it's just under 5% of folks who have attempted suicide. When we look at trans communities, it's 40%, 40%. So again, this should just stop us and go, whoa, what is happening here that is causing this discrepancy between what the general US population is and what trans communities are experiencing? And this is not about suicidal thought, this is about suicide attempt. So again, I want us to think about how are we creating our society in a way that makes it feel so unhospitable for trans folks. And as we're talking about all of these different forms of violence, I think all of us that are on this call, we're socially aware, we're politically minded. We know that the more intersections that there are in an individual or in our society, the more likelihood there is that some of these things are going to happen. So Black trans women might experience more things than, Black trans men, or, I mean, we can kind of mix and match these identities and experiences, and we'll come out with some different results statistically. Many of you might have seen Saturday Night Live a couple of years ago with Don Cheadle, and saw that he just came out and had this Protect Trans Kids on as his shirt. So that's like an idea for Trans Day of Visibility, or any day, is to just, what do you wear in your clothes, and how do you bring forward trans issues? So let's talk about the triple pandemic. So the last couple of years, we've been talking about, last year, COVID-19 as our, the biggest kind of pandemic that's happening, which has had some kind of an economic pandemic, an economic impact. And we've talked a lot about racism in the last year and beyond the last year. So these kinds of things are three pandemics that we've all been living with. And I'd like to suggest that we've got kind of two overlays on top of those three pandemics. So one of them is legislated hate. So that's some of the stuff that Patty was mentioning, like, we're seeing stuff in Arkansas and, all over the country, as well as in the state of Wisconsin. We're seeing anti-trans legislation. And we're also seeing sanctioned hate. And by that, I mean, we are seeing people do really horrible things to and for and about trans people. And they feel empowered or entitled to do those really abusive and nasty things to people too. So they're feeling empowered to be anti-trans and to be transphobic and hostile. We can look at what kind of this arc has been over the last many years. And you all are really smart people, and I know that you all know what dates the elections have been, but we saw a steady increase in the protection, the legal protections of trans folks and LGBT folks from 2009, there was stuff there before then, kind of peaking at 2016. And then there was a pretty sharp decline starting in 2017. So this is not a scientific, graph, but we know that it's happened, it's peaked, and now we're at a point where we don't know where it's going to go. And so we, I think, are all responsible for where that arc goes next. Is it going to go back up for trans protections? I certainly hope so. Is it going to stay the same? Or are some of those people that really do not want trans people to have protections going to win? So we're part of the solution in that. So all of us know, no secret, that the last 4 years had a lot of anti-trans stuff happening in it. Lots of legislative things that have happened, and we don't need to kind of go over that. But what's important about that is we've moved in our country from this federally anti-trans legislated kind of initiative to going to states. So now individual states, individual cities or municipalities are taking on some of the issues that Trump's administration had done before. So just to give you a little snapshot, and this was from about 2 weeks ago. So as of 2 weeks ago, in this calendar year, there have been 286 anti-trans bills that were introduced in 36 states. 127 of those, so almost half of them, were anti-trans. So not just anti-LGBT, anti-trans specifically. 60 of those, 60, were about trans youth in sports, which a lot of us have been hearing, many different things about. And then 36 of those anti-trans bills were about denying medical care to trans youth in particular, restricting restroom access, and disallowing people to change their identity documents. So again, we've moved from the federal level of anti-trans stuff to more local as the primary focus. Let me share with you how some of these current events have really had a lot of cultural ramifications on trans people's lives. So again, we're going to take those underlying things: COVID-19, economics, racism, legislated hate, and sanctioned hate. And we're going to look at 6 of the ways that we feel that trans people's lives have been negatively impacted by those things. So the first thing is really about fear. We've seen a dramatic increase in the fear that trans people are experiencing in the world. And this is about, do I feel safe walking out my door and onto the streets? Do I feel safe that my employment is going to be steady and they're not going to fire me for being trans? Same for housing. Do I feel that my housing is safe and secure around my transness? People are obviously concerned about bathroom access, which is, the hot topic when people think of trans things. Oftentimes bathroom access is one of those top things that they think about. People are also being really fearful about their relationships. We're living in this polarized world where a lot of people are wondering, is there going to be family tension if, I see my family, COVID safe, see my family, but is there going to be some tension? And people are really, really worried about hate-motivated crimes. And if we're paying attention to the news, we know that there's a lot of different kinds of hate-motivated crimes that are spiking right now. And anti-trans violence is also one of those places that there's a spike in hate-motivated action. A second thing that the current events are kind of doing for trans folks is that people are seeing, people in general are seeing national leaders, political figures, even kind of celebrity people saying really anti-trans things. And how that's playing out for trans folks is not just that those leaders are saying things, but it's, again, empowering other folks that are not the leaders to say the same things. So an abuser, like in somebody in an intimate partner violence situation, might be mirroring the language of the Donald Trumps of the world. And that's coming into their relationship. So I don't know how to describe it other than, people are taking what they hear and they're bringing it into their personal lives and they're using it against the people that they know and who they supposedly care about. A third thing that's impacting trans folks is the systemic racism that should be affecting all of us and is affecting, many, many, many of us. When we're doing things like seeing that there are political rallies and marches, a lot of trans people have had negative interactions with law enforcement in general, and especially if folks are Black or brown, they've had negative experiences with law enforcement. So folks may want to get involved with political movements like Black Lives Matter, but may really fear that their transness is another barrier in terms of like, can I go protest and will I be safe if I protest? Not just because I'm protesting, but because I'm trans and I might be targeted because I'm trans. So again, there's just this increased feeling of safety or concern about safety that people are having when they embody more than one identity, and especially when it intersects with race. So COVID-19, I know, is one of the pandemics that is kind of the overarching piece of this, but how COVID-19 is impacting trans folks, again, those especially who might be in abusive relationships with a partner, maybe living with parents or family members that are not accepting or welcoming. COVID-19 has meant that people are spending a lot more time at home with those people that might be abusive. And there may not be a way to get out of that home environment to a safer place. So school might be a safer place, or someplace else other than their home might be safer. A lot of folks are also feeling a lot of financial dependence on others. So they may not want to, disentangle from an unhealthy relationship because they don't have the funds to live independent of that person. The fifth way that we can look at the current events impacting trans communities is really the sense of instability that trans people are experiencing. Clearly, we're all experiencing a lot of instability in the last few years, but we've been watching trans folks take actions that they wouldn't necessarily take now, versus before. So things can be like, I want to have surgery now before my health insurance company decides that they're going to re-put up a trans exclusion on my health care. I'm going to change my name now while it's still legal for me to do so, even though I'm not sure I'm really ready to do that. So those are some of the things that people are taking actions on, even though they may not be ready or at a point that they're really comfortable with doing that, but they're fearful of what's going to happen if they don't do it now. We're also seeing that the instability is causing people to feel a lot more depressed and a lot more suicidal. So when we looked at those slides that said 40% of trans folks have attempted suicide, we were adding to that with this instability that people are currently feeling. And again, people are hanging on to anything to try to become more stable, even if that's something that they're hanging on to is something that is unhealthy. And the sixth and last thing that I'd like to share about in terms of the current events and how it's affecting trans people is that there's been a spike in alcohol and drug use. And I think that, again, is true for a lot of non-trans folks. COVID has been hard on a lot of people, and coping strategies of drugs and alcohol is one way that people are getting through. We're seeing that people are also voluntarily isolating, not necessarily because of COVID, but are pulling into themselves, are retracting. And so they're not getting the support that they used to get in this last year, the last 2 or 3 years, last 4 years. We're also seeing that kind of in contrast to that. So people are isolating, but then there's also some people that are taking higher risks. So higher sexual risks, might be driving faster, any of those, any kind of risk that you can think of. Some people are taking more of those risks. We're also seeing that within the trans community, we're seeing a lot of hierarchical positioning. So I have it worse than you have it, less bad than I do. And a lot of people are kind of yelling at each other, and this horizontal hostility is happening. So rather than gaining support from people within a community, people are lashing out at each other. Two last things on this slide are we're seeing a dramatic number of folks who are detransitioning or retransitioning. I want to be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with people making transitional choices. Wherever they and however they need to move in their gender journey is totally cool. But some of the folks are making these choices because they fear, like, I don't feel comfortable living as a trans woman anymore because I feel stigmatized and people are doing X, Y, and Z to me. So therefore, I'm going to transition back to living as male because I somehow feel that that's safer. So people are making choices that are not about their identity, but might be about safety, might be about some pressure from other people. And the last thing on this slide is around weapons. So I think many of us know that there's been a dramatic increase in purchasing of weapons in our country. Trans folks are the same as the rest of the country in terms of buying more weapons. So when people are feeling unsafe, a lot of times people think, hey, there's no laws to protect me. I'm going to protect myself. So when we look at things like folks having weapons in their house, and they might be suicidal, and they might be in an abusive relationship, that is a super deadly combination. So that was a really whole bunch of negative stuff. Let me share with you some Wisconsin data. So again, also going to be a little bit negatively slanted, and then we're going to move and talk about some positive things that we can all do. And again, I want folks to remember that trans folks are resilient, trans folks are beautiful, and this is just the experience that a lot of trans folks are having in the world. So let's look at some Wisconsin-specific data. So this is data that we collected in 2019, 2020. We collected initially at Pride Fest, which is an event that gathers like 45,000 people. And so that was the start of it in 2019. We did some in-person events where we gathered data. We did social media to gather data. We sent things far and wide. So we had a good response rate of 523 responses. Not great, but not bad. And when we cleaned our data, we had 453 respondents that were valid sample data. We had geographic reach that was fully from the very tip of Wisconsin all the way down to the bottom, both sides, really good distribution across the state. Here's what we found. We found that less than half of the people were employed full-time. So a lot of people were not employed or not employed full-time. We found that folks had really, really low income, really, really low income. So 42% had income that was below the poverty level, below $9,000. That is mind-blowing and really upsetting, I think. When we look at the next income bracket, so $10,000 to $24,000, 25% of folks. So when we look at just those two levels, and that's, you know, poverty to barely getting by, let's see if I can do the math, that's 67% of folks in Wisconsin that identify as trans who responded to the survey are living at really, really, really low incomes. 70% of the folks that responded to the survey said that they experienced challenges because of how other people perceived their gender. So they might not have, you know, had problems with their own gender, but how other people were seeing them and seeing their gender, 70% of folks said that they experienced some kind of friction with the outside world. We asked folks about their name change and if they wanted to change their names, or if they didn't, or, you know, they want to but they couldn't afford to. This kind of matches the national data. So around 40% said yes, they've changed their name, but there was also, you know, 40% that says no, but I want to, and then about 20% that says, you know, no, I don't want to change my name. I'm good with where I'm at. So again, just kind of a range of where people may want to land on name and gender change. When we asked about workplace discrimination, 42% of trans folks in Wisconsin have experienced some form of workplace discrimination. And when we broke that down a little bit, we wanted to know what type of discrimination they were experiencing. So as you can see on the slide, gender identity expression was, for this group of folks, the highest reason that people were experiencing workplace discrimination. Sexual orientation was the next highest on that list. And then folks also mentioned their disability status, their race, if they were a survivor of abuse, and other things like that that contributed to their workplace discrimination. We also looked at hate-motivated crime. So we asked folks, you know, have you experienced something that you perceive to be a hate-motivated crime? And so 31% said they had. And of that, we broke this down into gender vectors, because one of the things that we oftentimes hear about is that trans women in particular are experiencing more hate-motivated crime than trans men. So we broke this down by the gender vectors of our demographics. And what we found here in Wisconsin in this sample was that trans men and people assigned female at birth were experiencing or reporting more hate-motivated crimes than trans women or assigned male at birth folks. Take it or leave it, but that's what our data happened to show. We asked folks about their bathroom safety. Do they feel safe using public restrooms? And 26% were happy using, you know, whatever bathroom was available to them, whether it was a binary gender-based bathroom, they were cool with whatever option they had. But you can see that 55% were like, well, sometimes I'm comfortable, sometimes I'm not comfortable. 6% said I'm not comfortable in any bathroom. And 13% said, well, I'm only comfortable in gender neutral bathrooms or all gender bathrooms. So bathrooms can be a really big point of access, and, you know, we all need to pee. And so it would be good to have bathrooms that everybody can access. This is another piece of data that I would like us all to pause on, because it's really, really, really substantial. So of the folks in Wisconsin that we talked with and we interacted with and we took surveys from, 83% said that they had a mental health condition that impacted their daily activities. So not I'm depressed some of the time, but I am so depressed that it impacts my daily functioning. Getting up, going to school, eating, working, some of those things. Profound number here. And when we asked people then, well, if you sought mental health care, not everybody did. If you did, why are you seeking mental health care? So this adds up to more than 100% because people could check more than one box. But you'll see that the biggest reason that people were seeking mental health care wasn't about their trans part of themselves. It was about feeling depressed or anxious or suicidal or stressed about something. And then the trans stuff was more minor in terms of what was important for their mental health care. So I think a lot of times we think that if a trans person is accessing mental health, that of course it's going to be about their transness. And the reality is trans people are challenged by a lot of the other things in life, and that may not be where they need to go as on trans things. So I will have another swear word here, and I know that we're mostly all adults, and even those of us who are not adults can handle the resilient AF. So these are two of the buttons. We bring buttons everywhere in person when we can go in person, and these are the two of the buttons that are the most popular for people to pick up off the table. So people like saying that they're resilient as fuck. So if anybody wants one, I will send you some. Pop a note to me, and I will send you as many buttons as you'd like. So let's talk about a few good things, and then we're going to do a little bit of interaction before we flip things over to a panel. So some good things. When we look at our Wisconsin data, we were really, really surprised, even with what we know about national communities and negative experiences with healthcare. In Wisconsin, 80% of our respondents had a primary healthcare provider. That is really good. That is really, really good. We also asked if they liked and trusted them, and most people said, yeah, I like and trust my provider. So that is really, really cool. We asked people where they were accessing support and what kinds of things felt supportive to them. And so some of the things that popped up highest on their list were that they were finding support with people that shared similar hobbies with them. They were finding support and connection with people that were in other trans groups that they were interacting with. They liked people in their neighborhood. They like their faith-based community. So a lot of times people are surprised that trans people are engaged with their faith-based communities. A lot of folks are and find that to be really meaningful. And for some of the Black and brown trans folks who responded, they found a lot of meaning in connecting to the balls and pageants, which I'm happy to talk more about if that's an unfamiliar thing for folks. But that's where some of the people were gaining the support that helped them feel more resilient. We asked folks about if they were interested in activism, and I was really surprised that 53% of folks said, yeah, I'm really interested in activism. I think that, I want to get involved. And so we asked folks, well, where do you want to get involved? How do you want to get involved? So the things that were of most interest to people around activism were increasing trans folks' access to healthcare, about people losing their rights or increasing people's rights. People were worried about and wanting to get active in terms of workplace discrimination, so changing those workplace laws. Some other places that people were interested in were decreasing stigma, decreasing street-based violence, and improving school life for students. So that's just kind of a snapshot of what we found in that Wisconsin data that's relatively fresh. Just a quick snippet on this photo. I have permission to share with you who this is. This is our graphic designers on the right, and she has 2 kids, and they have both since come out as trans. So when she started working for us about 10 years ago, kids didn't identify as trans, and now they both do. So it's really kind of cool how the world works, and she is a fantastic mom, and you can probably see by this image that she really loves her kids, and her kids really love her. So there's a lot of really good, strong families that support and love their kids. So I'm hoping that we can do a fast bit of this. And Patty, I'm wondering if you could type into the chat URL, if I can copy it for you. What I'd like us to do is to think about micro-inclusions. So a lot of us have thought about microaggressions. Micro-inclusions are the opposite. So they're small steps that we can take to include somebody. So on a bigger scale, micro-inclusions are symbolic actions that force us to recall the humanity of others. So if you let me just close us out with a couple of things that may not have been on the list and the map that we just generated. I think a lot of them are, but let me just share with you a couple of things that I tend to think are really important that we can all kind of keep in mind. So number one is ask people about their name and pronouns, because pronouns matter, names matter. I think we all have that. We've all gotten that into our heads. The second thing is to use social media. So I wanted to share that the screen is about Dr. Rachel Levine, who is from Pennsylvania. And so the Pennsylvania Democratic, I don't know, the folks in Pennsylvania, I don't know which Democratic piece in Pennsylvania did social media about Rachel Levine, as well as a whole bunch of other folks. But she is the first Senate-approved openly trans person. So, like, you know, you can post that on your social media, whether it's your group social media or your own personal one. You can raise and uplift trans voices. You can raise and uplift trans issues. You can let other folks know that you care about trans people and the issues that are affecting trans people and trans communities. So almost all of us use social media. And if you do, I encourage you to think about how you can use that to occasionally or frequently make a difference about raising awareness and improving the lives of trans folks. I encourage folks to be an upstander. So I saw one of the comments in there about, like, you know, stop somebody if they're making an offensive joke. It's hard sometimes to speak up or step in, but a lot of us can sometimes call people in instead of calling people out. So I encourage people to figure out where it is that you feel comfortable in your own process and how you engage with the world, and think about how you can step in, either literally or figuratively. I think this was wrongly numbered. Sorry about the numbers on these. The next one is to get involved and to show up. So I know that this is a group of folks who does literally kind of put your body in the streets and on the line. And, you know, when you're able to, please show up, because it really makes a difference. So there have been quite a few trans-focused marches and rallies in the last several years. And, you know, people really value having big numbers of people there and feeling supported. And if you want to be the guardians, you can be the guardians. If you want to be one of the crowd, you can be one of the crowd. But we really, you know, I really encourage you to show up if you feel comfortable and safe doing that. And the last thing I wanted to share with you is this thing that I often call as like the soft thing to do, but I think it's probably more important than anything else that we can do, which is to be kind. So trans people and all of us are experiencing a lot of things that are not very kind in the world right now. And what happens if we are kind to each other? I want to hug people so badly, but, like, you know, when we can hug people, let's hug people if they want to be hugged. Let's reach out to people by text or by email or by phone. How can we be kind to people? You know, somebody's sick, can I bring you some soup? Whatever it is that shows some little ounce of kindness will really, really, really go a long way. And it can change that suicide attempt rate. It can change a whole bunch of things. So remember pronouns, remember being kind, and you'll be good to go, in my opinion. But that's just my rough take. I'm gonna skip over questions. And if we had chat, I'd like you to think about what you're gonna do tomorrow that will improve trans folks' lives. So we just came up with a whole bunch of things in that mind mapping. So think about something that you can do tomorrow. It's a micro inclusion. So something that's really small, something that's really big, but what are you gonna do tomorrow and make a commitment to do that? Thank you for spending the first hour with me. If you want to reach me, you can find me at that email, and I will post it in the chat in a little bit too. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here.